informal and tactical. We want our alumni to share their tips in getting into grad school, what their application process was like, um, potential interviews that they had, undergraduate experiences, work experiences before grad school, and resume builders in order to get into those programs. Today's talk will begin with a few questions from myself as the moderator, and then we'll chat. We'll chat for about 20 minutes, and then we'll jump into student Q&A. Please remember to keep your cameras on and microphones muted. When we do jump into student Q&A though, feel free to unmute your microphone and ask a question, or feel free to send it in the chat or to myself or Jen, and we'd be happy to read it aloud to the group for the panelists to cover. So without further ado, we'll jump into the panel now. And if everyone joining us from the alumni side could just share a brief introduction, including their undergraduate resume, potential career before the PhD program or pre-doctoral program, and where you are now and what you're studying within the field of economics.
I can go first if that works for everyone. So my name is Hema Shah. I graduated from UVA in 2020 with a major in math and econ. And I went directly into the PhD program in economics at Duke, where I study labor economics, econometrics, and topics related to economics of education. Before coming to Duke at UVA, I worked as a TA for Stat 2120 and as a TA for Bill Shobe's environmental econ class. I also worked as an RA for Sandeep Sukhsankar in the development group at UVA, and I also did some work with Amalia Miller and Sarah Turner, sort of related to gender and education.
I can go next. Can I? Great. My name is Maggie. I am currently a first year PhD student at the University of Pennsylvania. I graduated from UVA in 2020 with a double major in econ and math, like Hema. While I was at UVA, I worked as a research assistant to Professor Charlie Holt in the VCon lab, and I was an undergraduate teaching fellow for the intro, micro, and macro classes. I also did a research experience for undergraduates through the National Science Foundation, and I think that was really helpful. I didn't go straight to a PhD program. After I graduated, I ended up taking 3 years to be a research assistant at the Federal Reserve Bank in St. Louis. So there you end up working with a lot of people. And from there, I applied to both grad school and the National Science Foundation's graduate research fellowship, which is how I ended up at Penn. So that's the gist.
Great. My name is Erica. I graduated from UVA in 2022, where I double majored in econ and stat. I actually spent my first 2 years at UVA working in psychology research before I started working as an RA in econ. Like Maggie, I RA'd for Charlie Holt in the VCon lab doing experimental economics. And then Charlie became my advisor for my thesis, which is about environmental auction design, which has informed a lot of my interests going forward. So other than classes and research, much of my time at UVA was spent teaching as a fellow for Econ 201 and 202. And then my 4th year, Charlie and I co-taught a small behavioral seminar together that then became Econ, I think it's 2082 now, which he's still teaching, which is very exciting. So since graduating, I've been working at Opportunity Insights, which is a research institute at Harvard as a pre-doctoral fellow. I'm in my 2nd year now, and I applied to graduate school this winter, and I will be starting in the fall, but have not decided where I am going to be yet. So stay tuned, I guess.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So this next question is more from your own perspective. I don't know if this is feedback you can receive from the programs, but we were wondering what were the important aspects of your application that really made you stand out in your eyes to those grad school programs and led to your admittance, as well as pre-doctoral.
I guess I can take a stab at this. As you said, it's difficult to say from my perspective what was the most helpful or grad apps or for the job that I'm currently at, but I think it's in general, it's important to demonstrate that you have strong quantitative skills, research experience, and potential to generate like broadly impactful, interesting, and original research ideas. And you can achieve this through a number of different ways. It can come from the strength of your quantitative coursework, your standardized test scores, your writing sample. Your recommenders can speak to these qualities. I don't think there's like a silver bullet in terms of getting into grad school, but it's important to be cognizant of which aspects of your application are weaker than others. So then you can address that and try and compensate in one way or another.
Yeah, talking from firstly about like my time at the Fed. So I did get to work a little bit with like sorting through some of the resumes. So the things that really stuck out were like a lot of interests. So especially when you're applying to things out of undergrad, not everybody has opportunities to do research and has opportunities to take as many good classes. And so what's really always been good about a resume was like, has somebody demonstrated that they were able to go above and beyond to do something, even if like that isn't necessarily available to them. So like you write in your cover letter things that you would have liked to do or the things that you're interested in. So interest was really big. And then I think applying to grad school, it was a lot of like math and quantitative skills were really important. And then being able to demonstrate that I had some research capabilities and research because I was coming out of kind of a quasi pre-doc at the Fed. So they were paying attention to what I did while I was there, as well as what the people who worked with me there had to say.
Yeah, I feel like Maggie and Erica covered most of it, but coming straight from undergrad, I think there is a lot more weight on having all of the math coursework and having good grades and then doing the research that I did as an undergrad with faculty here at UVA who could write me strong recommendations talking about my interests and also like my potential as a researcher since I didn't have full-time research experience beforehand.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much. And Emma, I think you can kick us off on this next question as well. It's more specifically to what the application process really looked like, as well as the timeline and eventual admittance into the grad school program, especially since you applied straight out of undergraduate, which many of the students on this call might be interested in. And then Erica and Maggie, obviously, Erica, you're going through it right now, and Maggie, you did it after taking a little time to work. So those perspectives are also very important, and I think could apply to some of the students.
Yeah, so I'll just say first that it's becoming less and less common, I think, to go straight from undergrad into a PhD program, partially because many schools select on having prior full-time research experience. So this might be a less common experience, like in current cohorts than it was for me. But in terms of timeline, everything kind of happened all at once in the fall of my fourth year. So before then I had to take all the classes and take the GRE. My recommendation would be to do that by the summer before you plan to apply. So I guess if you're coming straight through summer before fourth year, especially if you're considering having time to retake it. And then applications happen during the fall semester. Deadlines were typically like around December. And acceptances came during the spring semester. Most of the time the deadline is around like April 15th or something like that to decide where you're going. And if you would be taking time off, I'm sure Erica and Maggie can speak more to this, but application periods range from like the fall, so similar timing to PhD applications, and then plenty of programs recruit later in the year as well.
If either Erica or Maggie want to jump in and share some information on taking some time off before the program as well, or we can move on to other questions if kind of Emma covered a lot of it.
I think Hema covered a lot of the like econ PhD application timelines. The only thing that I would add to that is the other big deadline that I was dealing with was applying for the NSF fellowship. That can be really helpful because a lot of programs will ask you, have you applied for outside funding? And that information and saying like, yes, I have applied shows that like, you know enough to know to apply. So even if you just put like 10 minutes of effort into throwing together an application to just like say you did it, that's can be pretty decent. But other than that, I took the GRE like the year before because the Fed paid for me to take it, which was really nice, as part of like educational funding. So I took the GRE pretty early, got the NSF application in a little bit early, and then went absolutely down to the wire on all of my PhD applications. Was working feverishly through Thanksgiving. But yeah, as for pre-doc stuff, I know that applications range really broadly depending on like where you're going and what fields you're interested in.
Yeah, I'll second that. We have kind of a strange hiring cycle for the pre-doc. We do typically hiring in the fall and in the spring, and I can talk more about the application process for that if y'all are interested. Um, but in terms of grad school applications, I had a similar experience to Maggie in which I took the GRE over like spring, summer, and then I got started on the NSF stuff. Went a little bit more down to the wire on that than I probably should have. Um, just because it takes a while to generate broadly impactful and intellectual research ideas. But it was a great commitment device for getting a lot of my thoughts together and getting some personal statements together. And that was really helpful for me going into the grad apps season because I already had kind of coalesced a lot of those ideas into documents that I then used to apply to grad school. Luckily, in the pre-doc, oftentimes they're pretty flexible in terms of the amount of time you spend working and the amount of time you spend applying to things. It's expected that you are probably going to apply to graduate programs in the fall. So your teams and the PIs are on board with giving you time and space to do that. So that works well.
Yeah, and Erica, would you mind expanding on just what the pre-doc fellowship kind of is, for students that might not be familiar with it, as well as your decision to apply to that, maybe over straight to a grad school program or somewhere else you could have worked?
Yeah, absolutely. So being a pre-doc is kind of like being a full-time research assistant. I would say that is it. We do the exact same type of work that you would do at the Fed if you're there for a year or two before you apply to grad programs. So our application process is a little bit easier than applying to grad school in the sense that it has three phases that are a little bit of a smaller ask than putting together all of those documents. So first you submit a written application that has standard components like a writing sample, CV, and transcript. We ask for recommenders, but not recommendation letters. It's just the sort of people that we're going to reach out to later in the process if need be. But not something that you have to get letters for beforehand. And then we also have a data task component. It's like a take-home assignment that you complete over a 2-day window that involves the sort of coding and data work that we do day to day. This looks like a lot of reshaping and merging data, summarizing information, and then like graphical display. How do you translate the information from the things that you're finding in the data to things that you can present to people and tell a story about your findings. And then we have like 2 short 20-minute interviews where you pick a project that you have worked on in the past and you talk about the methodologies and the identification strategies and those sorts of things. So in terms of what my job actually looks like day to day, I'm part of our place-based policies team at OI. So our project is focused on the effects of public housing redevelopment on economic mobility for children that grow up in these projects. And the way that we approach this is through linking administrative data through the census and tax records and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The PIs make the ultimate decisions about the identification strategy and like the direction of the project, and I'm responsible for implementing all of those changes in like the build and the analysis. So it's a lot of coding. That's pretty much my whole job. Problem solving and then making graphs. Usually when people ask me what I do for a living, I tell them I make graphs. So that's kind of an overview of what being a pre-doc is like.
Yeah, amazing. And would you mind sharing just briefly kind of the pathway to graduate school and whether that's kind of a requirement or something most people do within the pre-doc program?
Yeah, absolutely. So the pre-doc is a great idea if you are unsure, if you want to get a graduate degree and you're trying to figure out what is econ research actually like. maybe get exposure to some different fields and figure out what you want to do. So I would say about half of us come in looking for a little bit of additional experience before we apply to grad school, and then the other half are figuring out if this is actually something that they want to do, and it's great for both of those groups. The PIs and the research scientists here help you kind of cultivate your research ideas, and you learn about different empirical methodologies that can help you with your own work, and you get a lot of exposure to different types of research through seminars and workshops. And then we also get a lot of help in the application process, either from our peers or from the PIs and the research scientists in terms of like letters of recommendation, feedback on research ideas, and those sorts of things. So it provides a lot of structure in the application process, which is really nice.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much. And I'll take you off the hot seat for a second. Turn back over to Hema and Maggie. I was wondering if you guys wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your day to day. I think if I'm not mistaken, you guys are in different places in terms of the program, and it would be interesting to see how that's developed from, first year versus maybe 4 years into the program.
Mine's
Sure.
pretty boring. Mine's pretty boring because
You go first, Mike.
The first year is the same pretty much everywhere you go. You do your micro, macro, and econometrics coursework. It's theory. It's pretty standard. So like everywhere, all the programs that I applied to were the same. So you do your first year sequence. And then at the end of it, so when Hema was applying, I think the prelim exams were pretty common everywhere. So prelims are a set of exams that you take at the end of either your first or your second year. I think most of the time it's your first year, on the basis of the coursework you've been completing, and completing those exams as part of moving forward in the program. But as when COVID happened, a lot of schools ended up canceling prelims for that year because they thought it would be cruel to do that to the students. And so some, after they canceled them for a year, decided to continue to phase them out. So here at Penn, as long as you make a certain grade and all of your classes, then you end up not having to take prelims. So right now, my day-to-day is spent mostly on completing my homework and my coursework and my studying to the absolute best of my abilities, with a sprinkling of seminars and working with, other classmates and doing stuff like this. But it's mostly just class all the time.
Yeah, my days look very different than Maggie's do now. So I'm in my fourth year of the PhD program. So like Maggie said, at every econ PhD program, you spend your first year taking core courses in micro, macro, and econometrics, and you don't have any choices and you have to do it. And at some places like Duke, you have to take prelims at the end, and if you don't pass them, then you have to leave the program. During your second year of the PhD, this is also standard at most places, you take elective coursework. So based on your fields of interest, you take courses that are more kind of directly related to what your research will be about. And then during the third year, it's a combination of finishing up any courses you still have left to take, and then sort of preparing a dissertation proposal. So telling all of your advisors what is my plan for what I'm going to write for my dissertation. And then after that, you just have to write it, or do all the analysis and eventually come up with a dissertation by the end of the 6 year. So that's what I'm currently doing. I spend almost all day, every day, coding and producing analysis, and working towards papers that will eventually make up my dissertation by the time I graduate. And also sprinkled in there are various talks and seminars and meetings with faculty members to talk about sort of my progress with my research.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So I want to open it up to questions from all the students on the call right now. I have more questions to ask if people don't have anything too burning, but I want to make sure that you all have time to ask any questions about the application process or being in grad school or between the two. So if you want to ask a question, please feel free to unmute your mic or put it in the chat or send it to me or Jen directly and we can read it aloud.
I have kind of a question that's pretty targeted at Maggie. So in terms of when you're working in a pre-doc and then also applying for the NSF, a combination of how you balance those obligations and also the kind of work that you did beforehand to kind of craft your like I guess agenda for how you wanted to present your research idea.
Totally. So one of the best things about being at the Fed was that there's a very strong structure and a very strong kind of, because I was working in the research department. So most of the time, the research department expected RAs who have been there a certain amount of time to apply to grad school. So by the time when the time came for me to be applying, I knew that I was going to be applying the two economists because I get assigned to like just work specifically with two people. They knew I was applying. My immediate supervisor knew, everybody around me knew. It was very well documented that that was what I was going to be doing. And so there was a very reasonable expectation of like, hey, I'm going to give you a task. But also, if you need to be applying to grad school, you should go apply to grad school. That was like part of my job and my work because the Fed in St. Louis really valued us getting into good graduate programs because us getting into good graduate programs means more people want to apply to the Fed in St. Louis and it becomes a cycle. So balancing it wasn't particularly hard, but it was still a difficult process. I started my NSF application probably in the summer. And that started with actually just like a random email that we got from a like policy person in California, which asked one of my economists to do some analysis about some specific stuff that we had written a little like blog post on. And I kind of looked at that question. We did that analysis. And I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And so I took that and then I had a couple of different ideas. I put them together and I presented them to the other research assistants at the Fed. So they ended up being able to give me feedback and help me direct. Like, I was like, here's three ideas. What do you guys think? And then we sort of talked it through and I got a lot of really good feedback. And then when it came time to start honing those drafts, my process was to send it to a bunch of people at once and then receive all their edits, create a new draft, send it out to new people. And that was a really great opportunity to connect with my letter writers. So like I knew Charlie was going to be writing me a letter and I had a couple of people at UVA that I was like, I think I would want you guys to write a couple of letters to go to grad school. So I sent them all my drafts and my personal statements. And I said, hey, do you guys have any thoughts on on my paper? And I went back and forth. I probably had like 9 or 12 drafts of like there's two parts. There's a personal statement and a research proposal. The personal statement went through like 4 drafts. It was fine, but the research draft was like a really long back and forth process. So I put a lot of work and a lot of time into that. So balancing wasn't super hard because my job was centered around like that was part of my job at that point. It was like everybody wanted me to get into a good school. They wanted me to go and be an excellent representative for the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis wherever I went. So the balance wasn't that hard. What was a little bit difficult is I was also auditing like the intro micro sequence at WashU at the same time. That was a mistake. That was hard. Doing homework and doing all that was a mistake. But I don't know if I answered every part of your question, but just a lot of different stuff that I was thinking about at the time.
Yeah, I guess so like were you thinking like throughout the whole kind of time about like what you wanted your like research agenda to be throughout grad school, or is it like more of it? I guess you kind of explained that you just kind of got this idea from an email that you got, but
Yeah. So I went into the pre-doc, basically getting all my research thoughts and like the things that I was interested in from courses that were available at UVA. So I knew I liked industrial organization because I took classes with Federico. That was super fun. I had a lot of fun with that. I knew I was like experimental, super cool. I like macro. I like all of these different like things and pieces. But like just enjoying a class isn't necessarily a coherent research agenda. So it took getting exposed to a lot of different types of research at the Fed because we'd have people come in to give seminars on a bunch of different stuff. Like we had an applied micro conference, there was a econometrics conference, a finance, and like I got to look at things and sit in the back of a room, and you would sit and you would listen, and after 10 minutes you go, this isn't for me. Finance is not for me. Econometric theory is not for me. But in doing that, I got to then say, okay, what are the things that are for me? And it ended up, I got really lucky that one of the economists that I was working like kind of one-to-one with, I ended up like loving a lot of the work that she does. She does a lot of things with the economic geography. So I was in and on the Opportunity Insights website every day. I was throwing that data everywhere. So it ended up just being a journey of like learning what I don't like and learning what I do like just through pure exposure. And that was what a pre-doc really gave me. I think that was the thing that I got to learn a lot.
Awesome. I actually have a couple questions sent to me. One of which has to do with the pre-doc still, and those who have done it can kind of field it. But are there people that end up don't doing grad school after the pre-doc, and kind of what path do they take afterwards?
Yeah, absolutely. There are, I'd say most of those people, we kind of help place into a lot of economic consulting or other types of consulting, or maybe tech companies occasionally. I haven't stayed in super close contact with a lot of those folks because I'm surrounded by those of us that are planning on staying in grad school. But that it's totally a thing that happens. And some people leave the pre-doc early to do that. Some people will finish the 2 years and then decide they don't want to apply, and then they look into opportunities later. So yeah, it's a thing that happens.
Since the RA-ship at the Fed isn't an official pre-doc, people will do anything. I think like a third of people end up going to graduate school. So econ PhD programs have been more popular recently, but business schools, law schools, MBA programs, data science, and like you name it, someone's done it. Like a third of people end up kind of staying in the Fed system. So they'll go and work in a publications team. They'll go get a master's and come back. They'll do a bunch of different stuff. And then a third go on to places like econ consulting, doing data science, tech companies, like a bunch of different things. I told people a lot, like anything that you could do walking into like the RA-ship, you can do going out. You'll just have like a lot more skills. And there was a variation on like how long people would stay, anywhere from like people would stay for a year. I think the longest serving RA throughout history was like 10 years, but people also stayed for like 3 was a great number. That's how long I stayed.
Amazing. Yeah, and I think the next question is kind of similar to something I was going to ask, but a lot of you guys had double majors, whether it be math or statistics, and some students were wondering if you didn't kind of take those upper level math courses, what are the options in both the graduate PhD program as well as pre-doc for taking those math courses to kind of catch back up to speed? And do you think at an undergraduate level, your double major kind of put you ahead of the curve or kind of on track with everyone else for those programs?
I guess in my experience, most of the pre-docs either have a double major or a master's in math or stats. But there's also a lot of variation. We have some biology majors, we have some CS majors, so it's by no means exclusive to either econ or people that have done math or stats majors. So there's definitely some flexibility there. We tend to prefer people who have those strong quantitative backgrounds, though, because that's going to prep you well for the type of work that we do and the type of work that you would be expected to do in graduate programs. If you're looking to beef up on your quantitative skills, that's absolutely something that you can do while you're at a pre-doc or at the Fed. It varies a lot based off of the program, but I would say that most pre-docs take at least one class, usually real analysis, while they're here. And that's something that you can balance with your workload just by talking to your PIs, but definitely not something you want to do while you're applying to grad school in the fall. It's kind of a lot to take on at once, especially because if you have to write the NSF in September, October. But that's one way that you can help prep, and one way that a pre-doc can be a really good fit for somebody that maybe wants to work on that part of their application more. I know there are other programs other than the pre-doc at OI that have more of a focus on taking classes. I think there are some pre-docs at Stanford that we work with pretty frequently on our projects that are expected to be taking at least 1 or 2 classes while they are doing their pre-doc. So there are opportunities based off of like what you want out of a pre-doc when you're applying that are important to look into based off of your own background and what you're trying to work on.
Yeah, I feel like Erica covered it, but having a math or stats major is definitely a soft requirement in many programs. And if you don't have a math or stats major, taking as many classes as possible in math will definitely be to your advantage, especially like a proof-based class like real analysis. You can definitely take it as a pre-doc, but if you're already interested, like as an undergrad at UVA, and you have the opportunity to do it while an undergrad, it's probably easier while you don't have a full-time job. One other thing is, like Maggie mentioned, she took the intro PhD microecon sequence while an RA. You can also do that as an undergrad while at UVA. I did the first half of the PhD microecon class during my 4th year, and that was probably easier than balancing it with applications and having a real grown-up job at the same time.
I'd also recommend the second half of the metrics, the grad metrics sequence at UVA. I don't know if John Pepper still teaches it, but that was a great course. And it feels weird to jump into the second half of a grad course, but it really is like the beginning of the metrics part, whereas the first half is the statistical theory portion. And that was also a way you can demonstrate your quantitative background and your ability to pass graduate level courses.
Yeah, and this next question is more from what you've seen and maybe heard, but have you seen a difference in terms of graduate school acceptance rates when you're coming from somewhere like the Fed or a pre-doc program versus economic consulting or maybe something outside of the world of economic research?
I can only speak for my cohort here. So I know we have, so out of my cohort of 15, um, 10 are international students. So they tend to have some combination of masters and their own pre-doc experiences. And then of the 5 American students, 3 of us were Fed RAs. One person did a master's at LSE and did pre-doc here at Penn. And then the other one, she did econ consulting and then went to do a pre-doc also based here at Penn. So most people in my program did that, but I know in some other years it could vary pretty wildly.
I would say it's pretty uncommon at Duke as well to see someone who came straight from econ consulting, although I definitely think it is good experience. And in many ways, the experience is similar to skills that you would learn at a pre-doc. But yeah, it's pretty common for people to do econ consulting and then do a pre-doc and then apply. And in Maggie and I's DMP cohort, there was one person who worked in the private sector for 1 year and then applied to PhDs and is now at Yale. So it definitely is possible. And yeah, I don't know if it's becoming less common, but people do it.
Yeah, amazing. And then I guess a lighter question, but we were wondering what kind of the coursework feels like or how it differs from an undergraduate coursework and whether that undergraduate experience kind of prepared you for the amount of work that maybe a PhD program or predoctoral program really has. And we can kind of just everyone can answer it if they want to or just build off each other.
Grad school coursework is really hard. There's a lot of stuff that gets thrown at you really fast. And the whole idea is like, of your first year is to get everybody in the cohort to the same page in terms of like their knowledge of all of this theory. And like I said, a lot of my cohort has masters. degrees, which means that they've seen some of this coursework before. So it's a steeper hill if you haven't had a master's or had other coursework that prepares you. Thankfully, I'm relying quite heavily on the kindness of my cohort. It is very hard for me to figure things out, but other people are happy to show me, happy to help me. And so it ends up being this back and forth, but I do end up working a lot. UVA was great prep, but at the end of the day, like the speed of a graduate class and the speed of an undergraduate class are just different. Like if any of you have taken Maxim Enger's game theory class, I think it was one of the best undergrad classes that I took at UVA. And in my graduate game theory class, we covered absolutely everything we covered in that entire semester with Maxim in the first 4 weeks of this grad program. So just to give you an idea of just like how much stuff is kind of coming at you quickly, and it's up to you to keep up. It's not impossible. It's not hard. It is hard, but like it's not impossible. Rely on the kindness of your friends and cohort. It's lovely.
I obviously don't have a very large sample size to operate off of, but for the grad courses that I did take at UVA, my experience was quite similar. I was taking time series in the stat department while I was taking grad metrics, and we covered the entirety of the content of my time series class, which was a 5,000s level class, in 1 week in metrics. So it can be kind of like a drinking from a fire hose, but you just have to give yourself time to like sit down with the content. It will come to you eventually. Everything will come together. It's just a process of waiting for that to happen and spending lots of time with the material.
I think that covers it. There's a lot of material that I learned in the first year that I don't remember now, and it's fine. And it turned out fine. So
Amazing. And I have one more question, but if any of the student guests on here want to message me quickly or unmute their microphone, feel free to go ahead and ask another question. If not, we can wrap up after that.
can I just add one thing? So I run a graduate mentorship program at Duke where we provide application support to students from underrepresented backgrounds who are applying to PhD programs, either straight from undergrad or after taking time off to do a pre-doc or some other sort of job. And typically we open our applications to be part of the mentorship program around the summertime. And then if you get accepted, you get matched with a mentor who's a PhD student at Duke who can help you with the application process and like give you feedback on like your personal statements and things like that, especially for students who might not have mentors who they're working closely with like at their job or at school who can give them like super tailored advice. So maybe I'll just drop the link in the chat. Right now it's like not really the application cycle. But like I said, we will open it up again in the summer. And so if you're interested, you should definitely apply because it's very helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I guess one last question before we all sign off. Was there anything outside of just regular coursework that you thought was really essential towards your application while you're in the undergraduate level? Possibly like RAing or TAing, something like that that you thought really helped you learn a little bit more that you wouldn't have gotten in the coursework, or maybe just helped your application stand out?
I can go first. I know I mentioned the NSF REU research experience for undergraduates, and I saw Jen dropped a link in the chat. So that says the program that I said it was for mathematics, but while I was there, I got to select a project to work on, and what I ended up doing was Bayesian econometrics, which is very different. And so I ended up getting asked about my work there, doing that in interviews, in just all over the place. And now in my time series class, we are doing Bayesian econometrics. And so I got to have this really nice exposure and a really great experience, like being the person in the room who knew economics So it wasn't calling it econometrics, but I got to come in and provide some economic feedback. And I think that that ended up being really big for a lot of my applications. I got fee waivers on applications for having done a research experience for undergraduates. I think the NSF in applying for the graduate research fellowship was like, oh my God, she's an NSF girl, and a lot of other opportunities. So I think that that was really big, and it's also great money, and they like pay for your housing to go do something. So if you find one that suits your fancy, they're really great if you have the time.
Yeah, for me, I would say the biggest thing was trying to get research experience while an undergrad, because that is the one thing that you can do to demonstrate that you have interest in doing research, which is what you do in a PhD. So either through like the VCon lab or through a psychology lab or whatever, or also many professors, if you take like an elective class with them, they're open to you reaching out and saying like, I'm really interested in this. Is there any way that I could work with you, or do you have anything I could do, or do you know anyone who has anything I could do? And eventually you will find someone who's willing to give you something to do. And I think that's a really important experience.
I think most everything has generally been covered, but I will also second the being able to find research experience both as an undergrad or I think something that I've tried to do is continue to work on independent projects. If it's like an expansion of my thesis, or Charlie and I have continued to work together on a couple of different projects since I graduated. So being able to demonstrate that you have things that you're interested in and ideas that are cool and impactful that you want to pursue is something that's important for those programs. Absolutely. And maybe like take some CS classes too along the way if you have a chance. That's a good skill to have. I've learned a lot on this job. I would have liked to know a little bit more coming in, but I've learned a lot on this job. So
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to all of the alumni guests here today, and thank you to the students for coming. The Econ Career Office is going to be following up with a survey and a chance to win some Econ merch if you fill that out. So we really appreciate your feedback, and it helps makes these events move smoother, as well as help provide you guys with what you really want to see. We also shared the Career Series flyer earlier in the call, and that has the events that we're going to host for the rest of the semester on it. If you're interested in attending more. Otherwise, thank you so much, and feel free to log off the call now and enjoy the rest of the beautiful day in Charlottesville.